As I said earlier this morning, why bring this reading on Thanksgiving Sunday? The lectionary, which we're following for last week, this week, and the next 2 weeks, all cover the story of Job. It's a rare opportunity that the lectionary lets us do this. The lectionary also is not Canadian and does not care about Canadian holidays. And frankly, I think it sees them as a challenge anyway. Aside from Stephen's introduction to Job, why should we spend time on a weekend to extend gratitude, listening to one man complain about things well beyond his control? This is what I want to bring here, because this weekend is one where we give thanks. We count our blessings, we express gratitude, and yet we need to hold up both visions, one with the gratitude, and the other, a man who, as we talked about last week, lost everything, and he did nothing wrong. That was emphasized all throughout part one. He simply loved his God and did his best. But for reasons and machinations well beyond his control, it's all gone. Job, the story, is simply weird. No other word for it. It's not written like the other Hebrew texts out there with a guide on how to follow God's rules. You'll find throughout the Torah there's like 600 some odd commandments and rules to follow, and they're all in there. Or you'll have the Psalms, which are letters from people, including King David, to God, saying please for intercession and help, and also a celebration, or Proverbs offering wisdom. This is none of those things. It is a story. The author, probably an Israelite, probably experienced the exile of the Israelites from Babylon in the 6th century BCE. This is not Aesop's fables with a moral at the end. This, if we are to give it any form of genre, is closer to a Greek tragedy, written through the lens of ancient exiled Jews who know suffering and lament. It is a story that tries to make sense out of senseless tragedy, to put some rationale in here. And that's what makes it the most human of these stories. To switch gears from a bit, I come from a long line of retail workers. Not just me, my parents met at Sears, where they also met many of their family and friends, including my godmother. My grandmothers worked for many years in retail, including one, you guessed it, at Sears for the better part of 20 years. Whether in department stores or small hardware stores or even at the restaurant that I worked at for minimum wage in university, customer service-oriented work has been embedded into my veins. Now, to deal with customers is to understand that the vast majority of people out there are reasonable and sensible and polite. They may have complaints, but they are aware that you are one cog in the machine earning $10.25 an hour at that time, and frankly, cannot control it. But there are also a small portion that simply need to rage against the machine, let it all out, that they're mad, pardon my French, mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore. The problem is that they're yelling at me. And I was a hostess who was not able to control things like the price of their daiquiri or the timing of the sunset, very much beyond my control. It took years to build up a thick skin to realize, no, they're not mad at me. They're mad at this, all of this. I am simply the face representing the company, even the universe at large. This is true both for customers that gave complaints that even 20 years later, I will continue to find shockingly boring, I guess. I'm sorry, I don't care if we're out of chicken fingers. I don't get paid enough for that. I'm sorry. Fries, yes. Chicken fingers, no. Now, interning at the hospital, I also see that anger, but it's a different flavor, right? The anger is still there. The rage is still there. The need to yell and scream and say this is wrong is still there. But the tragedies around it, the circumstances around it, frankly, I have more empathy for. I am only so human and can only contain so much empathy. But for those patients, I'll carry it every day. Job's friends tried to do the same, tried to have empathy, and for 7 days they were very good. They did not say a single word for a solid week, sitting behind him and beside him. But by day 8, they were trying to figure out what to do. They have to go back to their own lives, and so they must ask Job, look, what'd you do? No, seriously, what did you do? You must have angered God. What was it that caused this much anger? Can you repent? Can we fix this? This is the wrong question. It is always the wrong question when someone is in the depths of that sorrow asking, what did you do to anger the universe, is the wrong question. What follows are several chapters that we avoid not because they aren't important and good, but because we only have an hour together where Job and his friends debate back and forth. Job says, I didn't do anything, and his friends say, well, you must have done something. Job says, I didn't do anything. God just doesn't like me anymore. And Job's friends say, well, that's not true. And back and forth and back and forth. The section we have today is Job declaring that he can't argue with his friends anymore. It's useless. He needs to take this higher up. He needs to see the manager. He wants and needs to speak to the boss. I have often encountered this idea that Job, and you may have heard it, the patience of Job, ever meek and mild and able to endure everything and can take it on the cheek and walk off and say, but I still love God. And that's great and wonderful for the first third of this book. The second 2/3 are where Job stops being patient because, frankly, he's had more patience than anyone at this point, and he is ready to fight. He is ready to argue. He is ready to plead his case. He is, as I said, mad as hell and ain't going to take it anymore. What is at the heart of Job's rage isn't the suffering. He's sad. He is lamenting. But it's not the suffering itself. It isn't the mistreatment by his friends even, because he understands why they have to say that. It is that throughout all of this, God has been silent. Not a single word from God at this point. Not even a letter, not a sign, something to say why, to say, are you there? God has never told Job why this is happening, even though we as a reader know it's why, and frankly, we can think it's a stupid reason as well. Job has no reason to give. Nothing to work with. It is simply unfair. He wants to know that his complaints will be heard by someone, anyone. Back at the hospital, I promise all patient names are changed, and frankly, I squish about 7 of them together to create one patient for here. I worked with a patient many months ago. She was flourishing, whole life ahead of her. Then in an instant, she's now paralyzed and unable to walk. Now, the doctors don't know where the prognosis is. Will she ever walk? Will she need assistance? She has physio, she has accommodations, she has friends and family supporting her. Her job made it work around her. Her condo is able to be wheelchair accessible with some work. I sat with her, and we had a very, very long talk. At the end, she mumbles something. I'm sorry, Ethel, I didn't quite catch that. Can you say it again? I said I want to punch God in the face. Just once. I want to yell to God that I am mad and punch God in the face so God knows I'm furious and I'm so mad I cannot think straight. She looks at me with a mixture of defiance and guilt. Defiance in daring me to tell her what her family and her friends and all the doctors have been saying for months. Keep positive. Don't get angry. Just keep praying. You'll figure it out. Just keep going forward. Stay happy. Look on the bright side. Be grateful for what you have. And guilt, that for the first time in her life she said out loud how angry she is with God, and I have a feeling it wasn't her first time being angry with God. She continues, "It isn't fair. I'm a good person. I'm nice to my neighbors. I pay my taxes. I don't litter. I've never cheated or hurt anyone in my life, but I'm never going to walk again, and no one will tell me why." The punishment doesn't fit the crime. For Job and his friends, for this patient among many others in my work, and frankly, a lot of us, this is the center of the problem. Job himself lays out this scene demanding his day in court, where at least someone could declare him guilty, even if it was a crime he didn't commit. He wants to be able to see God here and now, to lay out his burdens and ask, what did he do to deserve any of this? Like many of the people I have worked with. There must have been something, because if there wasn't, then it means that it happened for no reason. And that's even more terrifying. He wants to take it to the boss. He demands an answer. Ethel, my patient, has every right to be mad. It may not have been anyone's fault that this happened and she's no longer able to walk. A freak accident. Nothing could have prevented it, not even God. But that anger is an instinctive feeling of injustice. Something is wrong and needs to be corrected. That feeling is something a lot of us know really, really well. Frankly, one that God knows all too well. The same God in this story is the God that was with the slaves in Egypt and freed them from injustice. Was the same God that sent an angel to wrestle. That same God that worked with Moses, and when Moses debated with God, God replied back. The same God that wept as Jesus was crucified and buried. Job's God is the God that sits with the dying patient, with the refugee, with the victim of violence, with the homeless person, with the person who seems to have everything going right, but there's an ache inside their heart that cannot be filled. That is the same God, the one that says, I am with you. You are not alone. This is the same God that sits with all of us as we celebrate our blessings, as we mourn our sufferers, and says that we are doing our best, and that's all we can do. We're only human. Job, as a story, is an opportunity for us as humans to lift up that very human need for us to get mad, that very human need for us to say, it's not fair. Job is not a story where God wrote it for us to say, actually, I do this because I want to, and it's all your fault, and don't worry about it, mind your business. It is us trying to make sense of the suffering of the world, of wrestling with it. And I think if there's one thing we can take, it is that God, throughout all of this, is not leaving us alone, that God is still with us as we wrestle, as we yell, as we demand justice, as we demand his presence, as we demand her compassion. Thanksgiving this weekend is a time for us to think of our blessings, to say thanks for the wheat and the grape and the fish and the heart and the farmer, for the pumpkin, for dinner, for the ride home. To say we are thankful for family and friends, or maybe it's our health, or maybe it's the weather. I want to add one more to our list. I want to say thank you to a God for being a God that is big enough, immense and omnipresent enough, spans time and space, and is able to hold our anger. That doesn't say, just be happy. A God that says, bring it, I will hold it. My yoke is light, and your burden is heavy. I say thank you that our God will not hold it against us when we demand an accounting and demand to speak to the boss, because frankly, that God also knows what it's like to feel that pain. I am grateful that God is able to hold all of our blessings and our suffering so close. We may not get our day in court in this life, but we will never be left alone. And for that little blessing, I am grateful. Amen.